So good morning, everybody. As always, welcome to Recession Rebellion Day. Always forget. Really nice to see you all here as ever. And to those of you watching on YouTube later on, welcome and thank you for tuning in as well. As always with Recession Rebellion, what we seek to do is to give interesting, provocative and practical points of view and things to think about as we go through this extraordinary journey through the coronavirus issues we're all experiencing at the moment and the undoubted recession or depression that is actually already here, to be quite honest with you, but will only get worse probably over the coming weeks and months. And the purpose, really, and the reason we call it Recession Rebellion is about, making sure that we're giving each other tools and support and input that is helping us all to take a meaningful stand against, against that recession, and making sure that our own businesses, our own networks, our friends, our colleagues continue to prosper. So that's the spirit of it. 25 minutes, as always, interesting stuff to think about and talk about, and we roll on from there. Just before we get going, I wanted just to say, Martin, I wanted to say thank you for the love that we received on LinkedIn yesterday. So to Richard, Simon, Matt and Dominic, thank you very much indeed. It was really nice to see those comments, and as we say, we're trying to get the message out to as many people as we possibly can here. I was just saying before this webinar began that sources of good quality advice, there's a lot of noise out there, but sources of good quality advice are actually a little bit harder to come by. And, I'm not pretending for a single second, and Martin isn't either, that what we're doing here is, the gold standard or the answer to everything, but it is an attempt to try and do something of genuinely high quality. And we get nothing for it. We want nothing for it. We just want to try and help. So that's it's really appreciated when we can get that message out there. So thank you very much for responding to the call yesterday in that way. We have a bit of a treat this morning. So we are joined, we're in the presence of greatness today, ladies and gentlemen. We are joined by a gentleman called David Picton. So David, I've had the joy of working with David on and off now over the last year or two. Has an extraordinarily interesting career background, and for me, actually, bluntly, a slightly terrifying one. He's currently a business advisor and does that with all sorts of organisations to extraordinary success. But prior to that, David was in the military, where he led lots of tours of duty in the likes of Afghanistan and the Gulf, and did some very scary things and had to go up against some pretty horrible people. Not that he'd ever sort of make too much hay out of that, because he's far too nice and humble for it. But I've always admired that kind of the way that David's brought that experience and that sort of backbone and the bravery that he learned in the military and brought that to bear in the work that he does with organisations these days. So we asked David to join us this morning to give us his 20 minutes on our Wednesday topic, which is resilience. So he's going to talk with us now for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. If you've got questions, as always, whack them in the comments box, send them to Martin. He will be fielding questions at the end. And also, we're going to just post up some resources for you as well in the comments box this morning. So other articles, other things that are going on within Recession Rebellion as well that we think might be useful for you. That's more than enough from me. David, I think we're going to swap screen share now, so a bit of a technical handover for a second, but yeah, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Phil. So hopefully you're going to see that shortly, and we can get going. How's that? Hopefully you're seeing the first slide come up now.
All good.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, morning team. My name's David, as Phil said. Thanks for a very kind introduction, Phil. Basically, I want to just cover a few points and thoughts this morning, which hopefully will be helpful. Really all about resilience and coping. It's a word we've probably heard an awful lot of. If you do a quick hit on Google, you get about 115 million hits today on how humans cope. So right up there in what people are thinking. And we often have some negative implications. You can hear people talking about folks that aren't coping, I'm not coping well, I'm not coping today, so it can be a very negative word, but actually there's a great deal of power and strength we can derive from it. But it's worth picking it apart for a bit. So we're going to talk about the ability of a person to deal effectively with something difficult. So it's all about a reaction, in a sense, really. It's usually a reaction to some sort of psychological stress. It's usually associated with change. And three things that are quite key in the way we cope and we build resilience through coping are really about how we react to that change, the effort we apply, how we resolve issues and problems, and then all of that together means that we can control the stress that's associated with whatever that change might be. So it's quite appropriate for now, of course, and hopefully that just gives a bit of context for why we're talking about it. As Phil says, I've been working with him for quite a while now, really had some interesting projects and work that builds on the stuff I've done over the last 35 years or so. As Phil says, the military background was really quite an interesting experience. We'll cover some of that, but I've also spent the last 15 years or so with 4 rather big organizations and learned a great deal from that is now being applied to some business improvement side of things, some coaching and work with team dynamics. So mostly people and leadership, the thread that connects it. Okay, so really the favorite coping mechanism quote I've got, or I could dig out, really summarizes my belief on this. Really, it's a chap writing from the American side of things, Robert Fulham. But the points to bring out, of course, is that it's the difference. The way we cope is telling the difference between what's merely an inconvenience and what's actually a problem. And the quicker we can get to the heart of that, and the more consistently we can address that with our teams, the more effectively we can then address it and start to cope. So it's all about perspective, I think, is the essence that I take away from this quote. So what's happening now? Let's have a quick look and see, just to remind ourselves, as the UK goes into week 4 of lockdown, and we've heard a lot about how elderly are coping, how people are coping, but quite interesting to pick out some of the social indicators that are out there and some of the facts and figures. Ipsos Mori did a survey a week or so ago showing some of the facts and figures around how people were coping. Around a third was sleeping worse, 1 in 5 was drinking more, and around 35% were eating more food as they were in lockdown, or more unhealthy food as well. So those are sort of some of the facts and figures picked out, but that wasn't the majority. Once again, you hear this context of a negative connotation to how people cope. So the majority were actually coping relatively well, but of course it doesn't necessarily hit the headlines. 60% of people, almost 2/3 of people, had offered help to friends, families, or communities around them. If you saw the facts and figures, you can see that the NHS volunteer responders effort and the request there had 750,000 volunteers signing up in just 6 days. In fact, they had to halt the sign-ups. There were so many that wanted to help. So overall, I think if you look behind some of the social indicators, people actually do cope relatively well. When you look about some of the conversations we're having with clients as well, some of the things that people are talking to us about, some of them say working remotely is going well. They are developing new processes. They're building more collaboration, a bit more time for reflection as well. But others do admit, of course, that they are deluged in back-to-back calls. They're struggling in some cases to see the body language that they would have normally seen in a meeting. It's very two-dimensional in a sense. And more than one or two people that I've been talking to, coaching over the last couple of weeks, have said they feel obliged to play along. That's quite an interesting concept, of course, that people feel obliged to indulge with or involve themselves with this new way of working remotely when it actually might not feel that good for them. So all told, when I look at some of the figures, most people, about a half, think that it's going to take about a year or more to get back to what we used to call normal. So I think the points to take away from some of this is the implications are people are reacting in a variety of ways. It could be with us for some time, and even if we do come out of lockdown or such, we're going to be facing, both in our personal life and our professional lives, a need to cope somehow. So bringing all that together, I wanted to just share with you a quick model which hopefully will help you as you think of this and how you react to this. And if you're working with teams, or if you're a leader, this may help you as well in terms of the kind of dialogue or conversations you might want to get going with them, just to see how they're coping as well. So when you look at this model here, as we were saying, most coping mechanisms relate to some kind of change, usually a sudden change, something that forces you into a reaction in a sense. In this first part of the model, we're in that panic stage. So stage one is really shock. It's that idea that we've lost the security we would normally know. We've lost the familiarity we would normally understand. We've lost our routines. We've lost control in a sense. You might compare this to someone being captured, for example, in a military context. That immediate initial reaction is shock. Of course, and when we first went into lockdown, we were in a state of shock up to a point. But it doesn't take long, because we're humans, to adapt. And we start to accept the conditions we're around. We start to calm down a bit, start to assess some of the implications of what it means for us and what we're going to do about it. We also start to look slightly more subtly behind the scenes of our own thoughts and reactions to see what we actually can live with. And we start to assess our mindset, our state, and how we actually go through that. And we really start to apply some effort then to get to the really key part of this model. And it's this. This is when we start to cope. We apply effort to solve problems, and we apply rationale to sort out and deal with inconveniences. And if you can do that, or the quicker we can get people to do that, the quicker people start to cope, because humans do learn fast. The essence of this model is how fast you get people up that slope. So as you're looking at the slope of cope, we start to cope, we start to see what works, we start to understand how we're coping and adjusting to a circumstance. And before long, we're going to be well, because that's just the way humans have evolved. We've evolved to survive, we've evolved to learn, and we've evolved to adapt. You might not feel it, you might not feel it already, but some of you maybe hopefully are entering the fourth stage of the model where you actually start to thrive. And of course, how that works will be individual to you or individual to your teams and so on. But as you adjust your expectations and learn ways of being productive, whatever that change might have been to start with, eventually it is possible to thrive. And the interesting point is, of course, as you get towards the end of the model, when we go back to whatever normal was, or the change is over, or you're released from captivity, or whatever happens, it is actually possible to miss certain things and to struggle to adapt to what used to be normal anyway. And if any of you have seen Tom Hanks in Castaway, when he comes back away from the island at the end of the film, he struggles to adapt to the ease with which food is available and lights switch on and off, and everything that we take for granted. So there will be things we miss about lockdown, incredibly, whether or not that feels like it now. So all of that really is geared towards moving people through those stages, recognizing them in ourselves, and trying to move people up the slope of cope as soon and consistently as we can. So getting people onto that slope and up there, is of course the challenge for leadership, and it's a challenge for ourselves as well, because each of us will process it in a different way. The critical point about that, to try and help people get onto the slope and get up there, is the way we choose our behaviors, the sort of language we use, and the mindset we adopt. So it's really all about behavior, language, and mindset. And the more positive you can make that, the faster people will climb that slope. It's also worth noticing that people, of course, have energy sources, and they derive their energy in different ways. Around 2/3 of the population are extroverts, so they derive their energy from other people, and they will be struggling, there's no doubt about it, in this kind of lockdown scenario. But introverts, I'm one of them myself actually, we find this quite a good time for reflection. If you followed some of Phil's thoughts about deep thought, which was in one of the earlier webinars, that kind of context really gives you a chance to reflect, which is very much suited to the way the introvert would draw their energy. So if you notice people coping in different ways, it may well be that this is how their energy is applying to cope with the situations they face. And the benefits, of course, to getting people onto the slope are you can help them, of course, they can help others. And some of the work we do with team dynamics shows that mutually positive behaviors, mutually reinforcing behaviors, as other people see other people coping, it can become a rising tide that lifts all ships. So the quicker you can get as many people as you can onto that slope of cope, the more they can reinforce each other. But all of it comes back in the end to that point about routine and familiarity, what we lost at the start of that sudden change. The more that you can build new habits, becoming sort of instinctive actions or behaviors, the more you can start to shortcut some of the mental overload that's happening in that early stage of the model. So habits are critical for our day. We make around 2,000 decisions a day in an average busy day, and habits are developed to help us cut through that noise, build some stability, some structure, some momentum, some confidence. And those new habits we start to form as we climb the slope of cope are really all about the essence of bringing ourselves out of our mindset and forward to a more coping, forward momentum place. So we just start to build progress, if you like. Now, new habits take on average about 66 days to perfect, if you like, but it can range from anywhere from around a couple of weeks through to almost a year, depending on what that might be and how it is brought through. So the good news is that if it takes 18 days as a minimum, say, to form a new habit, we're on day 22 of lockdown now, so we should be already picking up some habits that we may not even notice, but they've become subconscious parts of our routine anyway. Now, the final point is what happens when people slip back down the slope, because it is very, very possible to do that. And that might be today, tomorrow, it might even be next week, where somebody appears to be coping well and then slips back. Now, this is inevitable. Of course, it doesn't mean they're not coping, but it really does mean they're human. They may just be having a bad day. And again, that's where we then start to bring out behaviors, language, and mindset to help those people recognize that this doesn't mean they're not coping. It's just perhaps that particular day. So it's just about keeping that progress and momentum up. Now, talking about momentum and progress, most of that's driven in a sense by making decisions. People cope through making decisions. People cope through being decisive. And the more you can introduce that to your style and the way you behave, the more you can lift that sense of momentum and progress overall. Now, one of the most incredible people I ever met was a chap called Joe Simpson. If you've ever seen Touching the Void, he was the mountain climber who suffered an extremely traumatic experience many years ago and found himself laying in a crevasse, quite seriously broken, and having to make decisions. Quite an incredible character, but his point was that you have to make decisions. You've got to keep going forward. This is probably one of the easiest ways to talk about that slope of cope, because being decisive, championing small victories, focusing on progress, bringing out the small actions in people around us, and just helping them to see that that momentum is being generated. This helps to defeat the real enemies of cope. The real enemies of cope are, of course, paralysis, indecision, negativity. Those kind of feelings and that kind of approach to things really starts to push people back down that slope, or even stop them getting on it in the first place. So once you've got that momentum, you look at resilience, how do you do that in yourself? And we're sort of entering that phase now where I'm noticing people talking about having to introduce boundaries around their day because the geographical boundaries aren't there, where they would normally leave their home and come back to it at night, come back to their families or to wherever they live. They're there all the time. So people are starting to introduce some boundaries and mental compartments to help them separate that world from somewhere else. They're using exercise, of course, which is great. And some people are doing more than they ever would under a normal circumstance. And just having some downtime, coming away from social media and stepping away from the constant stream of sometimes one-sided commentaries really there can help people to put those boundaries around it. But a model I use with teams and with leaders is as simple as pause. This really stands for picking out those priorities and focusing on them. What are the 3 or 4 things that are going to make the most practical and positive difference today? Only 3 or 4. If we do those 3 or 4, we will generate that sense of momentum. It's absolutely critical to ask the people around us what they need and how we can help. It's incredible that offer just extended to people makes such a difference for them. It's really key to notice that people will be learning new skills and doing different things, and that really requires a bit of tolerance and understanding from us. If we tell our messages through stories, we make 5 times better connections, and people remember that. They remember what we're trying to say. If we use simple metaphors, those stories are far more memorable than a list of facts, figures, and statistics. And of course, although it sounds incredible in the difficult times we face, just being a little bit more positive, choosing that kind of upbeat language, and even just introducing something a bit more playful, just being a bit more human, can make the whole thing start to work a lot better for the people around us and for ourselves as well. So bringing all that together, one of the things that makes me smile, a little story just to share and finish up with, was a story from an old military parade ground where every year in preparation parade, a white square was painted, neat white square, about 1 foot by a foot. So a small square on the parade ground painted by a cadet every year in preparation for that parade. And this happened year on year. A cadet was sent out every year to tidy up the camp, paint this neat white square. And this happened for decades until an old man appeared as a guest of the parade one year. And as he was coming towards the parade seating area, being shown to his seat, he broke away and headed for this white square on the parade ground, and the commander came with him, wondering where he was going. And as he got to the white square, he bent down and slowly tapped it with his stick. And the commander was pleased. Somebody's noticed the detail, the attention they've taken. And he said to the old man, "I see you've noticed our white square." And he said, "Oh yes." He said, "It takes me right back. That's where I spilled a pot of paint 60 years ago, and I painted into a neat white square so nobody would ever notice." And of course, they'd been painting it every year ever since, without ever asking why or why it was there in the first place. So my question, just to wrap up today, as you think about how you cope, is what white squares are you painting in your life or in your teams? What are you carrying on doing through this period of change without ever asking yourself whether you really need to do it at all, or what it gives to you, what it brings to you in your life? Okay, just to round up then, thank you very much. Just a quick scamper through where we are in the current phase, how to climb the slope of cope and use it to build a bit of resilience. The priorities: asking, understanding, stories and enjoyment, part of pause. And if any of that has started some thoughts in you, have a quick look for some extra resources that you can go and share and have a flick through. First one is a book we pulled together just about a couple of weeks ago. In the first week of lockdown. This is a free book, PDF, completely free. You don't need to sign up for anything. You can go and pick it up off my LinkedIn or off my website. Just download it. It's a PDF without any need to leave your details, and share it. Read it. There's 60 articles there from international authors that just talk about how to cope and how we are all coping or how we're reacting. And anything else that can help at all, just have a look, of course, to the website. And I hope that's been of some use to you. But over to Phil and Martin for any questions.
Martin, you're going to run questions for us this morning, I think.
Yeah, from your first question. So thanks for that, David. First of all, from your experience, what's the best tip that you found that you've transferred from your past career into the business career, if you like?
Yeah, I think the points about perspective were probably the lead ones, really. It's quite incredible how people get sucked into the immediacy of their situation, focusing absolutely on what they may be struggling with or facing right then, but actually trying to keep a bit of a vision on the longer term aims. We never went into any military campaign without working out how we'd get out of it and where the end state was. So I think in this sense, just starting to keep that vision of the future and preparing for that now, from a business perspective, a lot of the clients I'm talking to, I'm saying, how are you preparing for recovery? How will you get your teams quickly into that recovery phase as you can? But most importantly, what can you do today that practically will contribute to that when you get there?
Okay, good. Fantastic. In terms of the next question is about mindset. So you mentioned that a couple of times, and it's come up a number of times on the Recession Rebellion. When it comes to mindset, what is it about coping that people find most difficult? And then in brackets it says coping could be swapped for the word change. Yeah,
indeed. Yeah, mindset is one of the great tricks that our bodies play on us, of course, because again, as I was talking about introverts, particularly, a lot of introverts tend to, I'm one myself, we tend to go into our own heads and focus and feast on what's happening in there, really. So I think the best points about mindset that I've had, I think, are really to try to aim for the facts and figures and logic of a given situation. If you imagine Joe Simpson laying in that crevasse, the sort of checks he was doing is not what injuries have I got, but what still works, what is still working that I can use. And again, there's a little bit of a military context there. So, what do we have? In the Gulf War, it was well written up, it was well documented what we didn't have. If we'd sat there and focused on what we didn't have, of course, we'd never have got anything done. So we had to find ways to adapt and work around it. And to be fair, that's nothing special about the military. People and humans have been doing that for years, ever since we, early days of evolution. We've worked out how to use things, how to make new tools, use resources in the best way. So if we apply that same thought to our mindset, how do we focus on the positive aspects? What is going well? And it sounds a little bit like a Nirvana approach, but the more you focus on just one or two things that are going well, the more you start to drown out the negativity of that.
I think also, just to throw in a comment here from my side as well, I think, and David, I don't know if you would agree with this, but I'm really struck by, thinking about military analogies, I'm really struck also by the need for, I don't know what you would call it in the military, but the idea of peripheral vision at the moment.
Yeah.
So I would imagine, as obviously somebody who's been in the trenches like never, I would imagine that if you are, you would end up you know, the eyes in the back of your head thing would actually become really, really important. That constant awareness of what's kind of going on around you. And I think, you know, we've talked a lot about deep work, and you talked a lot about time for reflection as introverts and so on. But I also think there's a balance, because we have to keep our heads up, and we have to keep our peripheral vision on at the moment, because, you know, there may be both threats, but actually also opportunities out there if we start to look a bit more sort of broadly, you know, and we start to kind of keep that awareness really tuned in. There may be things that we can be doing or should be doing right now that you know, that are kind of there, but on the horizon, way out of our normal line of sight sort of thing, but they might just hold a key. So there's definitely something for me about that. I don't know if you would agree.
Yeah, 100%. I think I completely agree with you. This is one of the easiest ways to lose sight of perspective, of course, is just to focus on what's in front of you. And exactly as you're right, situational awareness, I think, is what you're talking about. Very clear power in terms of being able to see to the left and the right. And I think the essence of what I would say is if you can manage for today but plan for tomorrow, then you'll have a much better balance to that lateral vision, as you say.
Wonderful. That's it for questions for today, Phil. Just to remind everybody, tomorrow's session is a mind hack. So we're doing a 101 on decision making, looking at memory and experience. Anything you'd like to add, Phil?
No, just to say we've got some amazing speakers coming up now over the next few weeks as well. Next week, we're joined this time next week by an amazing lady called Julie Screech, who is both a extremely sort of decorated board-level advisor on data and also a hypnotist, which is an interesting combination. She's got a very interesting talk for us next week. We've also got talks lined up with a company called Roche Martin, who do a lot of work in psychometrics. And we've got some more coaches as well going to be speaking to us in the coming weeks. So these Wednesday sessions, we've programmed about the next 4 or 5 now, and a really interesting diversity and you know, of opinion as well, and some great men and women are going to be talking to us over that time. So really, really looking forward to that, and indeed to your session tomorrow, Martin. The only other thing I'm going to say to you, this is not going to take anybody by surprise, so don't log off, is please share all this. So David, that was brilliant this morning. Thank you very much. And the more you can get the word out on LinkedIn, this will be up on YouTube within the hour. Please keep sharing. Let's get this advice into the hands of the people who need it. And thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.